Begin the current Daf Mesechtas Rosh Hashanah Daf Gimel. Begin 10 lines down at the top of the Yomid. We continue to explain the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which was discussing how they would go ahead and notify people in the Gullus, the Geila, when exactly was Rosh Chodesh, they had to get the message out. And they had a certain method because of the Kusim who messed up the regular way, and then they changed it to Shluchim. Shir's corresponds because of Nacheskel to an time that I appreciate for joining us for today's Daf. Some of these discussing today's Daf are finished discussing that which we started in the previous Daf, the process of lighting torches in order to inform the public of the new month. Various Agadic teachings related to Psukim that come up. Then the Gemara Lamed Beis has the mission, the process of examining and questioning the witnesses, how they do that. And the key term in the concept in this Daf is Eidus HaChodesh, which is that the witnesses who they come and they have to testify that they saw the new moon, exactly how we question them to find out and verify if the veracity of what they're saying. Additionally, Chodesh Chaser, Chodesh Mali, which we're always mentioning in these dafim, what does that mean, the Chodesh Chaser? So if the Eidim come on the 30th day, then that's obviously going to be Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the next month. That makes the previous month 29 days, which is Chaser. If Eidim did not come on the 30th day, and then they come on the 31st, or if no Eidim come at all, then by default, the Rosh Chodesh is going to be on day 31, which is going to mean that's not really day 31, it's day 1 of the next month, and thus making the previous month into a Mali of that 30 days. So we begin the current Daf, 10 lines down at the top of the Yomid, which we had mentioned, as the Mishnah said, originally they would do Masi and Masuris. Originally, before the Kutzim messed this up because they started making their own lights, they would go ahead and make these torches. So the Mishnah says, Ketzad Hoy Masi and Masuris. How would they make these torches? So Mavin, Kloinosas, they would bring these long poles of cedar wood, and we said that they had all these different things that were flammable and to make a big conflagration, and then they would wave the signs from one mountain to the next mountain. Now, related to this, some of Yehudi says, Dalad Mini Arozimim. So we said they would bring these poles of cedar wood. So he said actually there's 4 types of cedar. Erez, Kasroim, Eid Shemen, Uberesh. And the Gemara explains what they are. Kasroim Amarav, he says Adara. The name of a tree, as the Gemara says in Be'ed Daf Tezvam Beis, he says Yitem Ben Adar, which is a well-known tree. So that's the Kasroim. It's a type of Erez. The Beit of Shilamri, they say it's actually Mafliga. Some say it's actually Zugulmish, that's Gulmish. And the Gemara says, Upliga, now this that Rabbi Yehuda said that there's 4 types of cedars, it disagrees with the Rabbi Baravuna. Because Amar Rabbi Baravuna, Amar Beit Rab, they said in the Shibah of Rab that actually a Sodomina doesn't name. There's 10 types of cedars. And Trace actually into Mishama, there are 24, but he says there's 10. Shlomo says the Pasuk in Yeshaya. Etim Bamidbar, I'm going to place in the desert, Erez, Shita, Vahodos, Beit Shemen, and Osam Barav, I'm going to put into the plain, Baroish, Tidhar, Ashur, and Yachtub. So I'm going to put all these types, as you see so far 7, where there's Erez, Shita, Hodos, Beit Shemen, that's 4, and I'm going to put by the Barav, which is the plain, Baroish, Tidhar, Ashur, Yachtub all together, that's 7. What are these 7 types of cedar? So the Gemara says, Erez is arsa, that's cedar. Shita, it's turnisa, that's pine. Hadas is asa, which is myrtle. Eid Shemen is afarsamo, which is balsam. And Beroish is barosa, boxwood. Tidhar is shaga, which is fir, with an eye. Asher is shurivna. I'm not sure what that one is. But says the Gemara, Hani Shiva Hab, those are 7. You told me there's 10 types of Erez. Says the Gemara, he says, I see them, they added on to that list of 7 another 3. Aloinim, Almoinim, and Almoidim. What is that? Aloinim is budmi, elms. Almoinim is baluti, which is oaks. And Almugim is kasisa, which is, like Rashi says, it's a type of a tree that grows from the ground of the sea and called coral. It's coral. Coral, go coral reefs, those are coral. Ikadam, that doesn't say a different version. It's Arainim, Almoinim, and Almoigim. Arainim is Ari, which is laurels. Armoinim is Dulve, which are chestnuts. And Almoigim is kasisa, that's coral. So that's the 10 types of cedars. Now, relating to this that we mentioned of coral, so the Gemara brings an interesting pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, "V'tzi adir, the mighty ships, lo yaberenu, will not be able to pass through the stream, which will ultimately be coming out of the base of Mikdash." Now, that's what the pasuk says. So Amar Rabbi says, "What's this mighty ship?" It's Zubin Burni Gedolah. This is a large ship. Now the question is, Heichi Abdi. In other words, what was this large ship made for that was saying that even a large ship won't be able to pass through that stream? So this is what relates to the corals that we're talking about. Ma'aser Shis Alfi Gavri. They would bring 6,000 men, Betresa Yarchi Shata, and for 12 months. Remember, some say a little bit differently. It was Teresa Alfi Gavri, it was 12,000 men, Beshit Yarchi Shata in 6 months. What were they doing? So many people in so many months. But Tani Lo, they actually loaded up sand onto the boat at the Shachna until the bottom of the boat would be submerged onto the ground of the sea. Now, you can still see the top of the boat above the water, because where they are moigim, where you have these corals growing in the sea, usually the water is not so deep. Anyone who's gone scuba or snorkeling, it's not that deep into the water, and therefore what they do is, so they had the boat go all the way down to the bottom, by weighing it down, by putting sand in it. The nach is baramadoi. Then they would have these scuba divers go down. B'kater atuni dechisba. So they would tie these linen ropes, which are hard to detach, to become disconnected. And they would tie one end, b'chsissa, on the root of this coral. B'katalu b'sfinta. And then they would tie the other end onto the boat. And then v'natli. Then these people would take the challah, they would take the sand from the boat, v'shadal and they would throw it out of the boat. So become the Malaya, so it was interesting how, so then the boat's starting to float up slowly from the water, as much as it's rising, akro masaya. So it would be taking out the roots of the tree of these corals. And that's how they would get the corals out of the ground. The coral was so expensive, so exquisite, that they were able to get a ratio of 1 to 2 for silver for that coral. And again, that's why the Gemara is bringing this in, because it relates to these 10 types of errors that were spoken about, which one of them is coral. Now, related also, so the Gemara, Talas Parvasa Havin, there were these 3 ports in Babel. There were Tarti Be'aramoi, or Roimoi, either it's the Arameans or the Romans, and there was Chadadei Parsi, there was one of the Persians. The Be'aramoi, Maskin Kisisa. By the Arameans, they would actually, the port was very chashuv, they would get the corals from there. But the Debei Parsai, by the Persians, Maskin Marganisia, they would take out pearls from the ground of the sea through the sailors. Umakarye, and that port of the Persians was called Paravasa de Mashmehig, was called the royal port, because they were able to get pearls out of there. So that was the 3 different types of ports that they had. Moreover, continuing with that pasuk that we mentioned before regarding the source of all these different types of errors, so the Gemara brings an Agavi teaching related to that. Amar Rabbi Yechon says, "Kol shita v'shita," all the pines, all these pine trees, shenat l'nacham Yerushalayim, that the Gentiles took from Yerushalayim, Asa Kadosh Baruch Hu l'achzilma. Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to end up giving it back to the Jews. Shlomo says that pasuk we quoted before. Etein ba'midbar. Etein is a future tense. I will place into the midbar erez shita. Now, as the Gemara explains, it says Rabbi Yechon, midbar Yerushalayim. So it's telling you that Hashem is going to put back the pines back to Yerushalayim. How do you know Yerushalayim is called midbar? Shlomo is plus in Yeshaya. Tzion midbar hayasa b'goymer. Tzion, which is Yerushalayim, was a midbar. So therefore, that's referring to midbar. That's why Hashem is going to put these pines back. Another pasuk, that same pasuk, again from Rabbi Yechanan, he says Agabic teaching. He says, someone's learning Torah, but he's not teaching it. He's compared to a myrtle in the desert, which some Gersos actually have no one's getting any pleasure out of him. So the person who's learning is a hadas, but he's like in the midbar when no one's getting any pleasure out of him, he's not teaching it. Now Igdam, those say a different version, that actually whoever learns Torah umalamda, and he teaches b'makom shein talmid chacham, he's somewhere in the community, he's in an area that there's no talmid chacham, and he's teaching. He compared to a myrtle in the midbar. The chavav, which actually very dear, as actually some Gesaris have, he's dear to all because whoever's taking, he's taking from him. There's nothing else available, and he's teaching that. So therefore, he's like a hadis b'midbar, which has a different angle that is very precious. Another teaching from Rabbi Yechanan, he says, "Oy lahem lo'ibdik chavim." Woe to the idol worshippers. She'elam takana. There's no remedy for them. Why? Because remember the pasuk says in Yeshaya, Tachas and Macheshes, in place of the copper which the Gentiles took from you, Hashem says, "Don't worry, I'll give you back gold." V'tachas barzel, and in place of the iron that they took from you, don't worry, I'll going to give you silver. V'tachas eitzim, and in place of the wood they took from you, don't worry, I'll give you nechech, I'll give you copper. V'tachas avan, in place of the stone, I'll give you barzel, I'll give you iron. But tachas Rabbi Kiva Chaveirav, but in place of all the martyrs Rabbi Kiva and all his colleagues, my Mavin, what am I going to be able to give back to the Jews? Moima says Hashem regarding them, the Pasuk says in Yoel, but Nikesi, if I'm going to come to take revenge of the Gentiles from all their sins, Damam loy Nikesi. But I'm not going to be able to take revenge of the blood of the Jews. There's nothing that could remedy that of the blood that they spilled of the Jewish people. Now the Mishnah said, so where did they go ahead and do these torches from? And it said all the different mountains. And one of them was my base balsam. So it's my base balsam, which was the final destination. That when it says when they went from mountain to mountain, it says base balsam. They didn't. That was the last mountain, and that's where they would go and just be Melech Hamevi until the whole Goyla was lit up like a Maduras H. So what's base balsam? I'm like, there's a kingdom of base. He says Zubino. That's the last mountain. So they would wave it there until the whole Goyla would light up. It says, my Goyla, what does it mean that they ask? But it actually refers to Zub Pumbedisa. It refers specifically to Pumbedisa. So my Maduras H. What did the Mishnah mean when it says that the whole Pumbedisa would be lit up like one big conflagration of flame? So talking about the Brisa, because what happened would be was every single person, every homeowner would take a torch in his hand, and would go up to the top of his roof, and then therefore they would like the whole lit up, and then the guy on base balsam knew that the whole Pumbedisa knew about it, and then from Pumbedisa they let all the people know what was going on for the Rosh Hashanah, and then everyone in Bubble ended up finding out about it. Now, kind of in the Brisa, relating back to the halacha of the Mishnah, that we said it went from this mountain to that mountain to that mountain to that mountain. So we learned the Brisa of Shimon Lazaimer, Av Charim v'Choyod v'Geder v'Chavrei Seha. Also, those mountains would light torches in these towns on their mountains. Now, what does he mean to say? Our Mishnah already said which mountains it was. So there's two different versions. Ikadam are those that say Beini uBeini, between the mountains that were mentioned in the Mishnah, Havakaimi were these mountains. So in other words, this Tana is adding on some smaller steps, micro mountains between those mountains that were mentioned in our Mishnah. That's one shot. Or Ikadam are those that say no, Lahach Gisa de Eretz Yisrael Havakaimi. It was on the other side of Eretz Yisrael, towards Babel, that were these mountains. Meaning there's two sides of Eretz Yisrael that went towards Babel, that you could take the mountains from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. So one shot is that these mountains were in between those mountains mentioned in the Mishnah, or the second version is that, no, the Mishnah mentioned one way of mountains to Babel, and this is mentioning another way of mountains to Babel, that they did both sides to send this Morse code to Eretz Yisrael, because Mar Choshev Ha'Gisa, in the Mishnah they mentioned one side, and Mar Choshev Ha'Gisa in the Tana Brisa just mentioning another side. Another teaching from Rabbi Yochanan says, "Bein kol achas va'achas," between every one of these mountains that we mentioned in the Mishnah, was shmoyne parsais, was 8 parsais. The Gemara says, "Okay, kama havlu." So what's the total that you tell me was from Har HaZeisim all the way till Biram, which is by next to Pumbedisa? So that's if you're doing the math, between each one is 8, and it was 4. So 8 times 4 is Tolosim B'Tartan. So you have 32. So I today we know if you want to travel from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, it's much more than 32 parsa. So Amar Rabbi says, yeah, what happens is that now the roads have been clogged up, and now it's a very circuitous road, and it's not straight, and because of that it takes much longer to get there. That's like it says in Hashaya. So L'chein, therefore Hinni Sach is darker, but I'm going to close up your roads with thorns. So it's not straight anymore. Nach Mitzvah Malach brings a different pasuk. So like it's in pasuk in Eicha, Nesivaisa Eva, my paths have been twisted. Again, it's not straight anymore, and therefore that's why it's longer to go from Etzol to Babel. Continuing the halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing the theme of the process of receiving the Eidim. So the Mishnah says, and as we were talking about that, the Mechal Shabbos to get there. So Chatzik Gedai Yerushalayim. There was this large courtyard in Yerushalayim. Uveis Yazik Hisnikar. It's called Uveis Yazik. Ulisham Kol Eidim Wisconsin. That's where all the witnesses would gather on Shabbos if they're Mechal Shabbos to come and testify. They would bring him into this courtyard. And the courts would come and inspect them over there in that courtyard. They would make these big kiddush, the big sudas they would make for them over there. Why they make it? Because anyone knows if you want to get people in the door, that they should come, make a big kiddush, make refreshments will be served, and then people come. Now, the people, the witnesses, wouldn't leave from that courtyard all day because they went out of the tchum. Whoever goes out of the tchum only gives Dalan Amis. And as Taisa says, the courtyard is considered like Dalan Amis, so they could walk around the courtyard, but they couldn't leave the courtyard. because you don't get more than Dalet Amas. Now, but history, when Gamliel HaZaken instituted, that because this would discourage people from coming, so that they should get 2,000 Amas in every single direction, like a regular person. And the truth is, not only these witnesses who get this dispensation, but even a midwife, that the doula, she's coming to help give birth, if someone's coming to save, save a person from the fire, from these marauding troops, or nahar, from a river which is suddenly overflowing, and it's drowning New Orleans, going underwater, or whatever it is, the children, and you're coming to save people, or from a collapsed building, so that person who's coming to save has the same status as people of that city. And then 2,000 amas in every single direction. That was a dispensation that the Chachamim gave for these types of people. Now, the following interesting question, that when we said the word that they had this big courtyard that was called Beis Yazik, so exactly Beis Yazik Tnan with an ayin, or like Beis Yazik Tnan, or is it without an ayin? What does that mean? So the Gemara explains. Beis Yazik Tnan with an ayin means Lishna Al Yehu. It's actually a positive terminology. Because the Chassidus says the person Yeshaya v'Yaskehu, which means that they fenced them in with walls of stone all around like a ring. V'Yasaklehu, and they got rid of all the stones, all the obstacles. So it would mean that basically that this courtyard was protected. Maybe no, Beis Yazik now without an ayin, Lishna Disaru is actually the terminology of pain. And the reason is, the way Rashi says it tastes differently, is because they were like locked up in jail, because they couldn't leave there all day. Which that's obviously then before. Meal tastes a little bit differently. Was it spacey? Was it bakveint? Was the room, or was it tightly pressed? But that would be. But basically, that's the question. Because the person Yirmiyah, that he was locked up in chains. So what does this mean when they came into this courtyard? Was that terminology like people would call it because it was roomy, or because it was very tightly pressed? So why did it have that name? So Mabai says Tashmas, we go from the Mishnah. What did it say over there? See this Gedoylas, they made these big sudas over there, so that they should be accustomed to coming. Obviously they weren't in pain. Obviously it was very geshmak. So says the Gemara, no, maybe there was both. Maybe it was a prime rib, whatever it was, but it's giving geshtift, you still walk out and it's very tight. So there was both. Maybe there was tsar and that there was simcha. It's not a raya. Could be they called it the gestippte tish is dort given, but the ma'aser given get the essen. So it would still get people in. It's not a raya if it's with an ayin or without an ayin. Then we continue with the next Mishnah, which continues on this theme regarding the witnesses coming in general. So okay, witnesses are coming. The question is, how do they inspect? How do they check the Eidim to make sure, to verify what they're saying is true? So it says the Mishnah, Zug Shabarishon, so the peer that comes first, so they check him first. And from that peer, the greater of the two people, they take him into the room first. Normally they tell him, and here's where the questioning starts. Emor, say, how did you see the moon? Tell me exactly, what was it? Was the moon before the sun, or was it after the sun? Moreover, was it to the north of the sun or to the south of the sun? Now Rashi gets busy to explain. He does it another time on the next daf. He wants you to understand how the sun works. So he says the sun always goes starting the east. We know, everyone knows that it rises in the east. It rises in the east and it rests and it sets in the west. Okay, but from east to west, what pattern does it take to get there? So the sun always goes from east, going south to the west, and from the west around to the north. It's a pasuk in Kehelis. It says Hoylech al Darim. It goes to the south. V'soivev el tzafon. What's v'soivev? It goes around to the north, meaning when it's at nighttime, when it's behind the planet, behind Earth, is when it's going to the north. Now, the moon, you won't see on day 30 ever, only when it's near Shkia Sacham. Meaning, because it's right behind the sun. We had this in the picture on the previous slide, which is when it's just the sun is about to set, and the moon is right behind the sun. you'll get that glimmer when the sun is setting, and then the moon you're going to get a little bit of glimpse of it then. And the reason for that is because the moon is very small and thin at that time of the month. It's right by the Moilid, so you won't see it when the sun is very strong because it's so small, and you'll only see it a little bit, literally at the end. Now, how do we know this? Because the Mishnah didn't say that they asked him, did you see the moon l'mizracha or l'marava? They only asked, do you see l'droima or l'tzvayim? What does that teach us? That they wouldn't see the sun in the Dharam. When would it be at the Dharam? Dharam is basically like Chatzos. Because they're saying it rises in the east, it sets in the west. So Dharam time is when it's midday around. So they're not asking him, did you see it to the east or to the west? That would make sense if you're seeing it by Dharam. Now, okay, was it l'droima or l'tzvayim? But we're not asking that. We're not asking Marava or Mizracha. We're asking you, is it l'droima or l'tzvayim? Because you're either seeing it, that's basically the question, are you seeing it by, so the first, this is what Rashi is coming to explain. He's coming to explain what the Gemara is going to ask in a moment. The assumption right now is that they would ask the witnesses, did you see it going in front of the sun or behind the sun? That would be question number one. Where was it? Was it before, or was it in front or behind? Because at times the sun is as we showed a picture once, it's either catching up, it's either behind or it's in front. So they asked, was it in front or behind? And was it to the north of the sun or to the south of the sun? Now the Gemara is going to ask, the first question is that Lefnei Hachama, in front of the sun, is Litzvayna. Why? Rashi explains, it wouldn't be appropriate to ask and to check if it's to the south or to the north, only at a time when both of them, the sun and the moon, are in the west, like when it's setting. Because if they're in the Dharam, which is around noontime, you can't ask, was it to the Tzafon or to the Dharam? They're both in Dharam. It would only make sense to ask, was it Lemizracha or Lamarava? Was it to the east or to the west? Or not south, because they're both in the south. Now, therefore, it's when they're in the west, right by shiur time. If you're asking Lifnei Hachama, if you're asking was the moon in front of the sun, that is to the north, because they're going to the north. Like we said, when it sets in the west, and they're going toward the north. As we said, it goes around in a circle. And if it's behind the sun, so it's to the south of it. So the Gemara is going to ask, that's the same question then. Saying Lifnei Hachama is Litzvayna, and saying behind the sun is L'droima. And that's what Rashi is explaining, because you never see the moon anyways by the time of the Moilid anywhere but by the time of the Shkia, which is by the Ma'ariv, which is they're moving to the north. Like we said, it starts in the east, goes to the south, goes to the west, and then it goes to the north. So if we're talking about by Ma'arava, by the Shkia time, which is the only time you would possibly see the moon, and you're asking him, is it in front of the sun? That's automatically going to tell me it's to the Tzafon part, and if you tell me behind, it's going to be to the Dharam part. So that's going to be the Gemara's question on this part. But then further questions that they ask him is, Kama Hayigavaya? How high was the moon from the ground? Like we know sometimes you see the moon high up, you see it very low on the horizon. How high was it from the ground according to what you could estimate that the way you saw it? Now, which way was the tip of the Pigimos? As we know, the moon has, especially by the Moilid, has these Pigimos, which are, since it's a crescent, it has tips. So which side was it facing? Was that Pigima, which obviously is going to depend on which, is it the end of the month or the beginning of the month, which angle it is, but is it facing towards the north or is it facing towards the south? That they would ask that question. How wide was it? So here's what the Mishnah says. And the Gemara is going to clarify what this means based on what the question was. If the witness says that the moon was in front of the sun, he hasn't said anything. The Gemara is going to explain exactly what does that mean. Okay, but after that they finished with the first witness, they would bring the second witness and they would check him out too. If it turns out that the words are matching up, the testimony is verified. Now regarding all the other pairs, they're asking just like the basic, chapter headings. Not that they needed them, because they already knew from the first pair that they saw the moon. They shouldn't go out frustrated. You want them to come. You wait online, you say, oh, sorry, we don't need you anymore. The whole Shabbos I spent, the Lord messed up the seed, whatever, and then I came here, so he's going to be frustrated. So that he shouldn't get frustrated, you let him come in and you say, oh, how are you, Mr. Say, oh, tell us, whatever this is. He feels happy, big smile, and he goes out, and he goes back to the Kiddush. So that they shouldn't get frustrated, that's why they bring him in. But now they're going to ask the question that we already mentioned before. Rashi already explained to us in the Mishnah what this Gemara's question is. You told me one of the questions was the moon in front of the sun or the behind of the sun? Says the Gemara, that's the same thing as the next question you asked him. Was it to the north of the sun or to the south of the sun? Is going to be the same thing, because, like we said, the north is in front of the sun. And so to Hain La'achacham, asking if it was behind the sun, Hain La'toim is asking to the south, because it's all the same thing as we said in the Mishnah. So Abaye says you're right. That no, actually, that it's talking about the Pegima. When we're saying in front of the sun, doesn't mean north or south. You're right, that's a different question. North or south is one question, which really means in front or behind the sun. So what's the question we're asking? Lefnei Hacham La'achacham, it means Pegimasa. This is called the Pegima. This is the part that's deficient of the moon. Sometimes you have a full moon, and sometimes it's pogum, it's missing, it's deficient. So we're asking, that Pegima, is that Lefnei Hacham, meaning is it facing towards the sun? Or is it facing the other direction as this picture illustrates? That was the question. When the crescent, was the crescent tips facing the sun? Yeah, it's trailing the sun, but is this facing or is it not facing? It's facing the other way. That's what the Sefer Mishnah tells us, that Imam, after witnesses say that, oh, it's actually Lefnei Hachama, that this is what it looked like, then Lo Yom Klum hasn't said anything, because we never have that the Pegima of Levana should be facing the sun itself. So that was the question they were asking this. Why? Because, why is pretty obvious, because it's always going to be the side that's facing towards the sun that gets that reflection of the sun. But the Gemara says in a more Nagadic way. He says, so what's the meaning of the pasuk in Iyur? Hamshel b'fachad imay, dominion and dread are with him. Oiseh shalom b'mrem, he makes peace in the higher spheres. What does that mean? So what it means to say is, ma'olam lo ra'asa chama, it never happened that the sun should see pegimasa shalavana, the deficiency of the moon. And neither does it see the deficiency of the rainbow, because the rainbow also is a curvature, and therefore it has a pegima. Now, pegimasa shalavana, it doesn't see the pegima of the moon because the chashadaita, because again, it's saying it more of an emotional, relational concept, but it based on the well-known Agadic teaching of that the moon and the sun were both the ma'eres hagedolim, and the moon became smaller because of that wax and wanes. It's like the husband and the wife. Husband's the chama and the wife is levana. So it doesn't see the pegima because that would give her a chalisha sadas that she's lesser than. So he never looks at that part. He always sees only the part that is illuminated. And pegimasa shakashas is also interesting. Why does the sun never see that the part that's the concave of the kashas of the rainbow? Is the lelim so that the sun worshippers shouldn't say that the sun is shooting arrows to those who deny it, because whoever shoots with a bow, which I think is coming back in style again, is that you put the pegima of the kashas towards his face. So the bow is facing that way. So if the sun is shooting arrows, it's going to look like that the keshes is the bow, him shooting at whoever denies his worship, and therefore that's why he never sees that keshes. Thank you for anything for hosting us.